Hey folks, this is Tom Opre, your host to understanding everything related to wildlife and habitat conservation. I ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, I strive to have you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Sit back and enjoy another excellent discussion. Hey folks, I'm Tom Opre, here with the Shepherds of Wildlife Society, and so many more of the important things that we deal with every day. I mean, we're listening to things in the major news media about wildlife poaching. We're hearing about conservation issues. We're talking about, the very essence of our planet. And today I'm really happy to say that I have a great friend here, Professor Adam Hart from the University of Gloucestershire. Maybe if you just give us a quick rundown, maybe in a minute or so, just, really who you are and what your background is.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Professor of Science Communication at the University of Gloucestershire, but my background, interestingly, is actually I originated as an entomologist. So I did my PhD looking at insects and I moved from there into kind of general ecology. So I started looking at all sorts of things, and from there I developed really a strong interest in African ecology, and that's really developed since about 2001, but actually really strongly over the last decade or so. So now I've got sort of several strands of research that I do, but quite a lot of what I do is based in Southern Africa, looking at Southern African ecology, but also looking at big conservation issues. So from the very small, I'm as likely to be looking at an ant as an antelope, I suppose is one way to look at it. But it's a way of bringing together a lot of those interactions and a lot of big issues, actually. They're all interconnected. Science these days is much more interconnected than it ever was.
The topic for today's discussion is what is wildlife conservation? Myself, it's become a very ambiguous word, I would think, because I've seen the word used in many different manners by many different people and organizations. And what I would like to do is try to maybe get our hands around our heads around what conservation truly is. Webster's defines it as planned manner, a careful preservation and protection of something. Another definition is the careful use of natural resources. And so, but when you start using the word preservation and conservation, they kind of, they're headbutting each other in the English language. And so I see people say, I'm a conservationist filmmaker, I'm a conservationist biologist. We see people out there that say, hey, I'm a conservationist. We hear all this terminology where people use it. I mean, these organizations, so forth. But really, what do you think conservation is? Wildlife conservation?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, look, I'm sat in one of my daughter's bedrooms here. Happens to be one of the quieter rooms in the house, and I suppose the way I look at conservation is making sure that the planet is at least no worse, for her and her next the next generation than it is now. And I think we achieve that through lots of different ways. You've already hooked upon the big clash, really, in sort of conservation circles, which is between preservation, essentially excluding people from the natural environment, almost treating the wilderness as an other entity and sort of humans as the kind of stain upon it, and trying to exclude us from it, and that's where you develop things like the fortress conservation model, which it works wonderfully, right? A mile away, there's a nature reserve. No one's building a house on it. No one lives in it. It works wonderfully here, but that's because this is a setup with the United Kingdom. That type of fortress conservation doesn't work so well when the habitats that you want to preserve have within them people, and those people may have lived there for a very long time. So that's when you start getting into the idea of conservation being the wise use of resources and integrating people with it. And we see this playing out all the time. There's a movement at the moment looking to sort of make the sort of 1/3, 2/3 model. You've probably come across this idea that sort of, humans live in 1/3 and we leave the rest, to nature, like as if we're not a part of nature and not reliant upon it. And I think that's where these conflicts come, because, certainly from the way I live, I don't need to use the natural world as my resource because I've outsourced that to other people, and then I go and purchase it through a shop. So I'm not connected to that anymore. If we're going to do a building project starting next year, I won't be going and mining the gravel myself or cutting down trees and hewing timber myself. I'll buy it. Someone else will do that. My mark upon the world will still be there, but I don't see it. I've outsourced it. I've sanitized it. Same with food. Same with medicine. But for a lot of people around the world, that is not the way that they live. They are living within the landscape. They are part of the landscape in a way that's very fundamental. And I think that's when we start to get into this idea of conservation being I've seen a definition. In fact, I think you told me this definition a while ago. The wise use of resources, I think, was one definition. And it's about striking a balance, I think, between what we take and what we give, and doing it in a way that certainly doesn't make it any worse. And ideally, of course, given the state of the world and where we've gone, makes it better. And I think that's definitely achievable with the right mindset.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think a lot of folks, they seem to live in this vacuum. We've talked a lot in the past, at least I have, about this separation that many folks in the Western modern world have, because we are able to outsource for all these resources. We're able to have them packaged all up. I mean, there was a survey done in the Chicago Public School District a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, but 47% of high schoolers didn't know that their hamburger came from an animal. They thought it just came from the grocery store. So the outsourcing that's going on, the disconnect that we have in our society, and I think that's probably led quite often to this misconception about what conservation is. Because as you mentioned, to me, we are animals. We are a part of this ecosystem, this planet, and unfortunately or fortunately, we have the biggest footprint on this planet. We're the most destructive animals on this planet. And so, being a good steward of the land, being a wise wildlife conservation, my definition has always been that we're going to utilize these resources. And if we don't utilize them properly, then we're going to destroy them. And there's all kinds of history, human history, where we've done that. Right here in North America with the European, Northern European invasion in the 16th, 17, and 1800s. And of course, we realized here in America, United States, in the late 1800s, we had President Theodore Roosevelt that said, hey, wait a minute, we're destroying all this. Let's do something about this, and actually created the Boone and Crockett Club, which is the oldest wildlife conservation organization that I'm aware of in the world. So, but science, you guys are button heads all the time too. I keep track of your stuff on social media. Obviously, in this day and age, your opinions aren't liked by a certain segment of folks out there that are what I would call preservationists. They kind of want to let the animals go do their thing and want humans to stay out of the equation and let God sort it out. And I did an interview with Dr. Valoris Geist, the late Dr. Geist, who is was a phenomenal researcher and scientist on wildlife biology issues. And he said, Tom, God's not going to sort it out, never has and never will. And yet we're here having this huge impact on the planet. How can science help us better understand wildlife conservation in a way that actually will be beneficial to wildlife and humans?
That is a tricky one, and I think ultimately, actually, it probably isn't going to be science. We can sit and we can tell people numbers. So, for example, one of the debates that I'm often involved with is the sort of trophy hunting debate, and it's trying to tell people, listen, actually, the way you think it is isn't the way it works. Here are the figures. Here's all the numbers. Actually, that doesn't reach people. What reaches a lot of people is the emotional images they see of people killing animals seemingly for fun, and that's what puts them off. And I think we need to address that. We need to accept that, but we also need to bring a different spin to it. And I think for me, it throws back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the way that people live. It's not our decision from the West when we outsource all these things to say to a nation like Namibia, for example, or a conservancy in the back of beyond in Zambia or something, how to manage those resources. We don't live in their shoes. And what's more, I don't think many people actually have any concept of what those shoes even look like. I was having a conversation. I'm researching a book at the moment looking at human-wildlife conflict and specifically actually fatal attacks from wildlife, and crocodiles feature heavily in this. And there's lots of studies of crocodile predation on humans. And one of the big factors is crocodiles live in the water. If you stay away from the water, you're probably fairly safe from a crocodile, but you can't stay away from the water if the water source is your source of water and where you do your washing and bathing and everything else. And I was having this conversation with someone, and they sort of said, well, why don't they just have taps in their house? It's ridiculous. Why are they putting themselves in harm's way? And I eventually managed to get through to them that this isn't the way that they lived, and they kind of backed down from it. But their initial thinking about the way that people live was very much centered around the way that they live, and then just transposing it. And I think that lack of empathy And it's a lack of understanding, but it's also a lack of empathy and experience of the way that people in other parts of the world live and the pressures upon them and their relationship with the natural world, which is very, very different from the relationship of most people driving around outside with the natural world. I think until we can get that message across, I think the idea that there can be a utilization of nature that's sustainable, that's good, that is in fact conservation, and in fact can improve habitats and so on, I think that is a difficult conversation to have. And the reality is that we can't take everyone on a 3-week field course to Zambia or sort of parts of South Africa or whatever. We can't do that. And I think that's where we have to be telling better stories. And I think those stories have to be focused around people and their requirements and needs, and then bringing the wildlife and the nature and that relationship with nature in. And I think that's really the best way to do that. And I guess, well, I'm talking to you. That's what Killing the Shepherd is kind of about. And I think that's the type of storytelling that we need more of, actually, because that, I think, is what hits home to people. They start to understand a little bit more about the situation than just somebody killing something, which, let's be honest, no one, pointless killing of wildlife is clearly not conservation. So these sorts of things that's the tension there. And I think we have to identify those stories.
Yeah, but I do think that I hear what you say, that the killing of wildlife is not conservation, yet, it can be argued very successfully that the value that's brought about by the killing of wildlife, in whatever form it is, cooking, killing an animal for, like you mentioned, the tourist hunting trade, or specifically for to selling meat, like what they're doing in South Africa with their ranching for wildlife situation there, where they literally are taking animals that have lived on the landscape for eons, that have evolved there, that live there, and replacing the domestic stock, which, it's a whole lot harder for it to survive there. Yeah. It wasn't meant to be. Their
productivity is very low compared to antelopes. Absolutely.
Exactly. But, when we see the situation where people are concerned about, this disconnect we're talking about in utilizing animals for food and other things that we're using them for, medicine, there's all kinds of things that we have animal parts and pieces in. But one of the things I talk to people about is the fact that, we've outsourced all of our killing. Yeah. And I ask people in my presentations, I'm like, hey, how many of you bought a McDonald's Happy Meal? And of course, everybody wants to raise their hand. I'm like, okay, let me explain something to you here. There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. You understand? There's nothing happy. Doesn't matter if you got the chicken nuggets or the cheeseburger. You've paid someone to raise and slaughter an animal in order to feed your kid. And I've just did some research for this book I'm writing about the film. But without the death of 72 billion land animals every year on this planet, humanity pretty much ceases to exist.
Yeah, and you can have any sort of dietary preference you want and any form of lifestyle you want, but you're still sat in a house that used to be habitat. You're still eating food that used to be that was grown on area that used to be habitat. And no matter what you do, we have an impression on the world, but I think many people just choose to ignore that, or they look at what they see as being a worse thing and go, yeah, but ignore what I'm doing. Look at this terrible thing, and that's a big problem. It's not equating. It's not having any realization of your impact on the world, and I see this as well with people that sort of will advance other models of conservation. So people are very keen on tourism, and tourism is a wonderful thing. I mean, phototourism, and it's a wonderful thing when it works, and there's no doubt about it. We've seen some of the issues over the last year about sort of when it doesn't work. But what's clear is that many people have no impression of the negativity of that as an action. They'll think that that's a wonderful thing, but they don't think about the enormous carbon footprint of thousands of tourists arriving, the paving and roads that's required, the hotel and infrastructure, the extractive industry that is required to build the infrastructure and then to furnish the tourists. And of course, all those tourists love to eat exotic game meat. I've sat in a very nice lodge in South Africa, overhearing a conversation about how dreadful hunting is and everything, and then both people then ordered Hemsbok and the Impala steak, and there was absolutely no shred of sort of realization of the foolishness of what they were saying, or indeed the fact that the particular property they were on used to be basically a cattle ranch and was now a thriving nature reserve, effectively, that also, of course, extracted some of the animals to pay its way. So there's all these kind of disconnects, and I think that comes really from two things. It comes, first of all, from a lack of knowledge, and I guess we can address that with education in all of its different guises. But then there's also, it's not just enough to sort of be telling people something. Someone has to make the decision to take that information on board and perhaps turn over the way they think. And that is arguably a harder thing, because actually it requires a bit of humility, and it requires people to sit back and say, you know what, I was wrong about this. I remember the first time I went to Africa back in 2001. I was fresh out of a university degree. I expected to land and basically be looking upon, a David Attenborough documentary. I went to Malawi. I saw an awful lot of AIDS-related funerals going down the road. I saw a lot of kids selling mice by the side of the road. I saw a lot of burnt landscapes and smelt a lot of charcoal. I saw one hippo floating in the river, next actually to a dead person. But I didn't see very much else. Then we went across to Zambia, and I'm literally on this trip across, like just looking out of the window, trying to find wildlife and birds, because I was dead keen on this stuff, still am. A few birds and stuff, but goats, sheep. Then we go to a property, and I'm in there, and it's suddenly that's what I was looking for, right? There's stuff everywhere. There's a reticulated African rock python, rather massive thing being dragged off the bed I'm about to sleep on. Why are there so much wildlife here? And that was when someone turned to me and said, well, because we farm them. We're not farming them, but we encourage them here, and we fund that through hunting. And that for me was just a real kind of, what? I just done a degree in that included conservation biology. I thought pretty well informed. I had no idea this is what went on. And it was kind of shocking, looking through the SCI catalogue and seeing porcupine skull length and stuff and all this kind of stuff. As someone that likes data and wildlife, it was kind of interesting, but also, it was a little bit of a sort of about turn. But it took a bit of time, and it takes a bit of intellectual humility, really, to sort of step back and reassess how you think about the world. And I think that is a big problem that we have to overcome, because a lot of people get very entrenched in their views, particularly when animals are concerned and when perceived cruelty to animals is concerned. And turning that around, I think is that's very difficult. I think for some people we'll never turn them around, but I think other people can be shown that actually the world is a different place than they think it is.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, we just completed this film, Killing the Shepherd, which is just starting to run in the theaters here in the United States, and will be online here after the U.S. Thanksgiving, the end of November. And in that story, we're telling the situation on the ground, the details of what these people, an indigenous rural community trying to survive and eke out a subsistence living in a place where it's tough to live, even if you have everything you do need. And in doing our film festival showings, we have these opportunities to showcase the film in front of a lot of different people from all over the world. And we just got back from Spain the other day, and it's just amazing. I call it the duh moment. You tell this story and everybody says, oh my, I can't believe that these people live this way, so impoverished, and their children being picked up by crocodiles on the side of the river and eaten. But that's the reality of these people. But then when you explain to them, like, hey, here's the benefits would come from the conservation, the wise use of this wildlife resource. Well, first of all, if you're not making any money off of it, you're not getting some sort of realizing a benefit, then these people aren't going to take care of it. They're going to destroy it. And that's the case in this film. They destroyed almost all their wildlife resource. And now they're building it back. And 5 years later, the first year I went there, you were lucky to see 10, 15, 20 animals in a week. Now you go out and you see, 300-400 in a day. And it's just amazing how Mother Nature can kind of recorrect that situation. But the duh moment came for these people in the theater was, well, at the end, should these people realize, these indigenous folks realize a benefit from their wise and use of the wildlife? And of course, everybody was, well, yeah, of course they should. It's only a few animals. Yeah. We're going to have a lot more left over because everything's reproducing.
This is 100%.
So it's just amazing. Like
it's show don't tell. We see it when we take students on field courses, and I've taken private groups down to Southern Africa before as well. And you'll sort of talk beforehand, and you'll say, look, we're going to go to some places. We'll be driving around. The guy that drives us around will likely have a rifle, and it's possible that an animal may get shot and stuff. And you have to kind of prepare people for the fact that if the animal's injured or whatever, or something has to happen. And you sort of start exploring with them, how these places work. And you can see for some people there's just like, oh, hang on a minute. And then within about a day or two of going down there, they're like, oh yeah, this is, yeah, of course. You're right, it's the duh moment. It's like, and it makes sense when you can see it. It doesn't necessarily make so much sense when someone's trying to explain it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, being in the photo safari lounges after the day of out viewing the wildlife, of course, now we see pictures of literally, dozens and dozens of safari vehicles with people hanging all off them to photograph the wild animals that they're literally some cases, steps away from. Which obviously creates another situation, the habitualization of wildlife, which we'll talk about in another discussion someday. But the reality I see there and what I hear from these people when I go to these camps is like, at the end of the day, it's not been a great day seeing all the different species, the big five or anything like that. It's only been a great day if they watched a lion or a leopard or cheetah kill something.
Yeah, it's extremely. I'm always disappointed when I'm going around with people and that's their approach. I mean, I can remember going around in a quite a big place in South Africa, and we were looking and there was some wildebeest, and there was a really beautiful moment actually, because there was a lovely. I can close my eyes and visualize it. There's a lovely kind of grass bank, a sort of felt bank going up. They were sort of beautifully backlit, and they were just that classic line of wildebeest going around, and just the golden hour and all of that, right? And the birds are, you've got the Cape turtle dove giving it in the background. It was an iconic image. I've actually got goosebumps describing it to you. And there was an Australian lady in there, and I could just hear her chuntering away in the background going, and she was complaining basically because we weren't getting any closer to them. And I think, I don't know what they wanted us to do. I'd charge across the veldt in a bucky trying to catch up with them. But that there was no appreciation of the moment. If you're right, if a lion had charged out of nowhere and taken one of them down, she probably would have been appeased in some way, but she would have been disappointed she wasn't closer. People have become, you talked about wildlife being habituated, and I think that's one of the sort of sublethal effects of tourism that probably are likely to be, I think, quite important. But I think people have become habituated to these animals, and they have an expectation of what a safari will be, and they're not interested in the species they've not heard of. You go and show someone a sesame or a hartebeest or something, they're just like, they want to see the big five, or they want to see, actually they don't want to see the big five, because when you show them a Cape buffalo, they usually don't understand what a Cape buffalo is. I don't know what they think that the fifth animal in the big five is, but they can normally name the others, and they're not. Yeah, they have become habituated to the sights of it. I remember going to the pyramids in Egypt, and overhearing people complaining about them, and it's like they were like, well, they look exactly. It's exactly what I expected them to look like, and that was their complaint. And it was because they had seen the pyramids so many times that they've become habituated to the idea of them. And I think that may be one of the problems with people viewing wildlife. They've become habituated to what they expect, and they're not. They don't appreciate them. They love animals. They don't love nature. That's how I would sum it up.
Yeah, that's a great comment there. They love animals, but they don't love nature. And that's the thing is, as human beings, we are part of this world, this planet, this ecosystem, this worldwide ecosystem, and all the other sub-ecosystems that are around the planet. Kind of to sum up this conversation, what is wildlife conservation? Maybe just give me a quick, what your idea is in kind of condense it to what you would want people to understand. And, you're an educator yourself. Try to educate folks that don't understand what nature is, don't love nature. What is wildlife conservation to you?
Wildlife conservation is seeking to conserve, seeking to keep the interactions that we have out there in the natural world, not just the species, but the way that they live and the habitat on which they live, the entire thing. It's not enough to focus on the iconic species, the charismatic species, the lions and the elephants. It's their interactions with their environment, with all the other animals, with the plants, with the fungi, with the bacteria, with the insects, all of that lumped together. And fundamentally what that comes down to is conserving habitat. If you conserve habitat, you are conserving the species on it. And if you use those species in a wise way, if you use them in ways that are sustainable, if you don't over-extract, then they will recover very, very well, even if you've overused them. And once they get to the right level, they'll stay there. So it's really all about protecting and using natural resources in ways that mean that they're there for the next generation and the generation after that.
Been an excellent conversation with you, Adam. How about you tell the people, how can they reach you and be able to follow you? I know you're on the BBC radio, but give us an idea of where folks can follow you in this world.
If you go onto Twitter, I tweet as Adam Hart Science, so that's a good place to find me. I'm also on Instagram, although I don't tend to use that quite as much, but I'm working on getting better at that. If you want to keep an eye out on what I'm doing, that's a good place to find out. I made a series of radio programs I think that might be of interest to people over the summer, which are available on World Service, looking at our relationship with predators. So we looked at lions, tigers, Crocodiles we mentioned earlier, and bears. There's another 4 of those in the pipeline coming out hopefully over the next few months as well, perhaps looking at hyenas, leopards, and a few other creatures as we go around. So yeah, follow me on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to keep on top of what I'm doing.
That's great. Folks, if you want to know about wildlife conservation, habitat stewardship, you want to know where the come all to end all is about this, you're going to be able to find it at the Shepherds of Wildlife Society's website. So go to shepherdsofwildlife.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And thank you, Professor Hart, for being a part of this. And look forward to many, many more conversations. And hopefully we'll be one of these days down in Africa together working on a project. So thank you for your time. All right, cool.